Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Finish Faithful. My name is Jeff, and you would think that our next episode will be Sardis, the message to the church at Sardis. But before we do that, I thought we needed to cover this one phrase about Jesus coming like a thief. Remember, in the message to Pergamum, it mentioned Balaam. Well, once it mentions Balaam, then you have to go back and you have to understand what it means by Balaam and everything that the Bible is bringing in there. And then in Thyatira, it mentioned Jezebel. Well, Jezebel is huge. You have to go back and bring in what the meaning is then of Jezebel for that passage. The message to Sardis is very serious rebuke with some very serious consequences. And so there'll be a lot to talk about there, but I wanted to cover this phrase in its own separate episode. Let's look at Revelation 3:3. Remember then what you received and heard, keep it and repent. If you will not wake up, I will come like a thief, and you will not know at what hour I come against you. To put that in perspective, we'll go back to where Jesus first told his disciples about this, and that's in Matthew 24, starting in verse 42. He says, "Therefore, stay awake, for you do not know on what day your Lord is coming. But know this, that if the master of the house had known in what part of the night the thief was coming, he would have stayed awake and would not have let his house be broken into. Therefore, you also must be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect." This is a little parable, a little illustration to help them understand what he means. So when he says, "I'll come like a thief," it doesn't mean that he's a bad guy or that he's going to do something wrong. The point is the thief comes at an unexpected time when you might not be ready, which they could all relate to because their houses weren't very well locked and they didn't have banks or safe deposit boxes to put their valuables. If the master of the house had known in what part of the night the thief was coming. And then at the end in red, "For the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect." We are supposed to know what part of the night it would be, not so that we could stop the thief, but so that we're not caught by surprise as someone would be if a thief came and robbed them. Well, now we need to zoom out and get the context in which he was telling this story. And so the context is really all of Matthew 24, which is the Olivet Discourse, which we've covered quite a bit in the End Times course part of Finish Faithful. What is this coming that he's talking about? The coming is the parousia. At the beginning of Matthew 24, he sat on the Mount of Olives. That's why it's called the Olivet Discourse. The disciples came to him privately. So this is just the disciples. This isn't the crowd. "Tell us when these things will be and what will be the sign of your coming, your parousia, and of the end of the age." That's what the whole chapter is about. Jesus is answering his disciples, his inner circle, about his parousia. And then in verse 27, it uses the same word again. "For as lightning comes from the east and shines as far as the west, so will be the coming, the parousia of the Son of Man." And then something we're very familiar with, hopefully, is in 1 Thessalonians 4, what we call the gathering together, the rapture. In Finish Faithful, I call it the rapture because that's the more commonly used term. This we declare to you by a word from the Lord, that we who are alive, who are left until the coming, the parousia of the Lord, will not precede those who have fallen asleep. So this parousia is a word that if you're into the second coming at all, you know this Greek word and you associate it with the rapture. But here in Matthew 24, Jesus is associating it with everything he's going to describe. Right before the passage about coming like a thief, here we're down in verse 32 of Matthew 24, from a fig tree learn its lesson. As soon as the branch becomes tender and puts out its leaves, you know that summer is near. So when you see all these things, you know that he is near at the very gates. Again, this is an illustration that would be so easy to understand if you lived in a place where there were fig trees all around and you ate off them in the spring when the leaves are coming out and the buds are coming out. You know that summer is near. He's saying it will be that easy for his disciples to understand that his coming is near because they will see all these things. Now, for people who believe that the rapture, the gathering together, is before the final year, that's called believing in pre-trib, because they believe that the rapture is before what they call the 7-year tribulation, which we've talked about a lot. And one of the key pillars of the pre-trib view is imminence. Oh, he could come back any day now. There won't be any signs before. He'll just come and secretly rapture us away. That's what pre-tribulationism believes. They believe it will be a secret thing, and they would say that a thief in the night points to it being a secret, and all the believers will be gone, like in the movie or the book, left behind, and the rest of the world won't know where they went. Jesus will have just sneaked them away before the final 7 years. This says, when you see all these things. The beginning of the chapter, they had asked Jesus, what will be the sign of your parousia and of the end of the age? And then he goes through these things, which we're going to talk about. And then he says, when you see all these things. So that means there's something to see. It's not just any time with no prior warning. Now let's look at verse 36. But concerning that day and hour, no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, nor the Son, but the Father only. Well, that also sounds like imminence, like it could happen any time. Hey, it could happen at any day or hour, no one knows. But what he's saying is you'll know that it's close when you see all these things, but you still won't know the day or hour. And it's interesting also that he says that he doesn't even know. When he was speaking this, he might have been assuming it would happen in the lifetime of the disciples that he was talking to. But here we are, 2,000 years later, and it will still be possible for us to see the signs like someone living in Israel would know when the fig tree was about to have figs, but we still won't know the day or hour. Going on to verse 38, for as in those days before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage until the day when Noah entered the ark, and they were unaware until the flood came and swept them all away. So will be the coming of the Son of Man. Then 2 men will be in the field, one will be taken, one will be left. 2 women will be grinding at the mill, one will be taken, the other left. Sounds like the rapture, right? Some are taken, some are left. But God didn't start the flood until the ark was ready and the animals were all on board. So the believers knew that it was coming, but the unrighteous were caught completely by surprise. This would have been so easy for these disciples to understand. They could have pictured the days of Noah. They could have pictured the unrighteous going on with life as they normally would, and then the flood came. That's the illustration. They could also picture people working in a field or women grinding at a mill. One gets taken, another gets left, right while they're doing their everyday stuff. Matthew 24 is covered extensively in the End Times course in Finish Faithful, episodes 11 and 17. It also comes up again and again almost every time we talk about the end times, because this is Jesus's best explanation of the timeline. So at the beginning of Matthew 24, he says there'll be false Christs, false teachers, there'll be deception, believers will be betraying one another, they'll fall away, there'll be wars, earthquakes, rumors of wars, nation against nation, and these correspond to the first four seals in Revelation chapter 6. And he summarizes all of these as the beginning of birth pangs, which is a real good illustration because that's how childbirth works. At the beginning, the contractions are further apart and they're less serious, and then they become closer together and more intense until the baby comes. Let's emphasize here the abomination of desolation, because he says when you see this, it will be one of the clearest signs, if not the clearest sign. When you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel standing in the holy place, let the reader understand. So let's understand it. Daniel 9:27 says, "But he shall make a strong covenant with many for 1 week, and for half the week he, the Antichrist, shall put an end to sacrifice and offering, and on the wing of abominations shall come one who makes desolate until the decreed end is poured out on the desolator." So the abomination is at the midpoint of the 70th week. Then he starts great tribulation and persecution for anyone who won't worship him, who won't get the mark of the beast. And that corresponds to the 5th seal in Revelation chapter 6. And then Jesus says there will be the signs of the sun, the moon, and the stars, and that corresponds to the 6th seal in Revelation chapter 6. And then Jesus appears so that everyone can see it. He's not coming in sneaky and taking the believers away. Everyone sees it. It mentions clouds, trumpet, angels, and his angels gather the elect. Not just from Israel, but from the four winds. So it culminates in Matthew 24:31, and he will send out his angels with a loud trumpet call, and they will gather his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. And by the way, there's a Finish Faithful episode 27 called Gather His Elect, which covers this in detail. And I believe that this is synonymous with the rapture gathering event in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. And that's what's called the pre-wrath position, because we'll see that the wrath of God comes after this. The church is saved from wrath through him, but the church is on earth for the first 6 seals, and when the Antichrist comes to power and begins his persecution. But Matthew 24:31, the gathering event, is after the beginning of birth pangs, the first 4 seals. It's after the abomination of desolation in the middle of the week. It's after this great tribulation, which is the worst ever, and it's after the cosmic signs of the sun, moon, and stars. So when Jesus says, when you see all these things, you'll know that it's near, but you still won't know the day or hour. What will we see? Or those who are alive when this happens? They'll see the beginning of birth pangs. They'll see the first 4 seals. They'll see the abomination of desolation, where the Antichrist is in the temple declaring himself to be God. You can't miss that one. There'll be this great tribulation when he comes after all the Jews and all the Christians, trying to wipe them out under the direction of Satan. they'll see the cosmic signs of the sun, moon, and stars. So now we'll go down to verse 45, and Jesus is going to further illustrate what it is to be ready for him to come as a thief. Who then is the faithful and wise servant whom his master has set over his household to give them their food at the proper time? Blessed is that servant whom his master will find so doing when he comes. Truly I say to you, he will set him over all his possessions. Would they understand this plain as day? Absolutely. They lived in a society where there were servants. They were told that they are the servants. They're going to be the leaders of the Christ followers when he's gone. They're going to be serving the food, so to speak, to the household. If you're doing that when the master comes, you'll be rewarded. And then here's the flip side, going down to verse 48. But if that wicked servant says to himself, my master is delayed, and begins to beat his fellow servants, that would be abusing their authority in the household of believers. And if they eat and drink with the drunkards, the master of that servant will come on a day when he does not expect him, and at an hour he does not know, and will cut him in pieces and put him with the hypocrites. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. So these disciples listening to this could picture this vividly. On one hand, you have the servants doing what they're supposed to be doing, and of course the master rewards them. On the other hand, you have wicked servants who think that the boss is gone and nothing he said matters, and they're doing everything wrong, and of course they'll be severely punished. Now the word cut him in pieces, or cut asunder, as some versions say, is probably more like a severe beating. I'll read you what Thayer writes in his lexicon. But in the text, the words which follow and which imply that the one thus cut asunder is still surviving oppose this interpretation, so that here the word is more fitly translated cut up by scourging or scourged severely. So in other words, if you've been cut in pieces, you can't weep and gnash your teeth. So since there'll be weeping and gnashing of teeth, it favors not the meaning that the translators come up with, that they were cut in pieces, but more that they're scourged or punished. Now, will Jesus actually dole out corporal punishment? Well, he's the Lord. He can if he wants to. It's not for me to say, but it could be symbolic of just the humiliation and punishment of seeing the master come, realizing how far wrong you were, realizing that this is going to affect who you are and what you are in all of eternity, and there would be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Again, these are simple illustrations that they would have understood so clearly. Now, they still were confused about Jesus dying, going away, coming back. But during the 40 days after his resurrection, when he was speaking to them of the things concerning the kingdom of God, this would have become so clear to them. And then they would have told these stories to other believers they were discipling. You don't have to be able to read. You don't have to be a Bible scholar to understand these illustrations, particularly in that day and time, because it was things that they saw every day. So they would have understood clear as a bell what it meant that he would come as a thief. It's not that he's the enemy, it's that you don't want the coming to be a surprise. You want to be watching so that you're ready for it, as you would be to prevent a thief from coming. And to illustrate how well understood this would be by believers at that time, let's go to 1 Thessalonians chapter 5. First of all, remember, chapter 5 comes right after chapter 4, right? And the end of chapter 4 is the rapture description, the rapture passage. And then it goes right into this, now concerning the times and seasons brothers? The times and seasons of what? The times of seasons of the parousia, this coming, this gathering event. You have no need that anything be written to you, for you yourselves are fully aware. Or as I think the King James says, you yourselves perfectly understand. How did they perfectly understand it? Why would Paul say, well, I don't even need to say this to you because you understand it so well already? It's because these parables, these stories would have been told, and it would have been so clear to them. And Paul would have told it to them, or they might have heard it from others who passed through also, discipling them and helping them grow in the Lord. You yourselves are fully aware that the day of the Lord will come like a thief in the night, he adds. Does this mean the rapture could occur anytime, which it's often taken to mean right after the rapture passage in 1 Thessalonians 4? No, it's hearkening back to what Jesus said, where he's leading up, when you see all these things, you'll be ready. Verse 3 of 1 Thessalonians 5, while people are saying there is peace and security, then sudden destruction will come upon them as labor pains upon a pregnant woman. Remember the Noah illustration? The wicked people of the Antichrist will think they've won, the world is as it should be, we have this great leader, we're all doing great, and sudden destruction will come upon them as labor pains upon a pregnant woman, and they will not escape. But you are not in darkness, brothers, for that day to surprise you like a thief. For you are children of light, children of the day. We are not of the night or of the darkness. And in episode 7 on the day of the Lord and episode 19 about this part of Thessalonians, we go to the passages in the prophets that the day of the Lord is described like being in labor. It's described like childbirth. So the Old Testament prophets were describing it like that. Jesus is describing it like that. Paul is describing it like that. It's all the same unified picture of how the end of the age will unfold. Verse 6, so let us not sleep as others do, but let us keep awake and be sober. Isn't that just what the parables of Jesus said? Don't be asleep at the switch. Be awake, be watching, be on guard, and be sober. For those who sleep, sleep at night. Those who get drunk are drunk in the night, just like the wicked servant in Matthew 24. But since we belong to the day, let us be sober, having put on the breastplate of faith and love, and for a helmet the hope of salvation. And then Peter, in 2 Peter chapter 3, verse 10, refers to the day of the Lord coming like a thief. So Jesus said his coming would be like a thief. Peter is saying the day of the Lord is coming like a thief. Well, do you see how the coming of Jesus, the gathering of the elect, taking them out, then brings on the day of the Lord? The day of the Lord immediately follows it. And that's what 1 Thessalonians was saying. Right after chapter 4 about the rapture, the gathering together. But you know the day of the Lord comes like a thief. It won't take you unaware. So Peter is going to talk about that now. Chapter 3, verse 10. But the day of the Lord will come like a thief, and the heavens will pass away with a roar, and the heavenly bodies will be burned up and dissolved, and the earth and the works that are done on it will be exposed. What does it mean that the heavens will pass away and that heavenly bodies will be burned up? Well, we can't think of this in our modern astronomy scientific viewpoint. We have to think of this from the standpoint of biblical cosmology. How did they view the stars and the heavens? And there's a lot of places in the Bible where it indicates that stars were either believed to be angels in heaven or were linked somehow symbolically with heavenly beings. But let's look at another description of this. Revelation 6, verses 12 through 14. When he opened the sixth seal, I looked, and behold, there was a great earthquake, and the sun became black as sackcloth, the moon became like blood, the stars of the sky fell to the earth, as a fig tree sheds its winter fruit when shaken by a gale. The sky vanished like a scroll that is being rolled up, and every mountain and island was removed from his place. Now, remember, John is having a vision here of the end times. So what we're after is the meaning of this. We aren't after pairing it up with scientific facts or descriptions as we know it. We're trying to understand the meaning of it. And the meaning, pretty simply, is the lights are going to go out and the heavenly powers are going to have a big shakeup. There's that verse in Revelation 12:4 where it says the dragon Satan swept his tail and a third of the stars in the heaven were cast to the earth. Continuing in Revelation 6:14, then the kings of the earth and the great ones and the generals and the rich and the powerful and everyone, slave and free, hid themselves in caves and among the rocks and the mountains, calling to the mountains and rocks, fall on us and hide us from the face of him who is seated on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb, for the great day of their wrath has come, and who can stand? Well, again, now is this actually what kings are going to be doing and saying in caves? Or is this just part of a vision to John to show symbolically they are going to see this stuff happen and they are going to know that it's the Lord Jesus. They are going to know that it's the God of heaven, and they are going to know that it's the time of his wrath, of his judgment. So to finally wrap all of this up, what does like a thief signify? It's not imminence where the rapture could happen any day now with no prior signs. It's within the progression of all these things, as Jesus said. Believers who are watching, as we're supposed to do, will know that it's coming, and this will have great reward. Those who are not watching will be taken in by the deception of the Antichrist, or just lulled into worldliness. Understanding this phrase, like a thief, will enable us to get through that phrase in the Sardis message more quickly and cover the other aspects of the Sardis message. But I'd like to end with this verse that's kind of funny, but kind of not. Revelation 16:15, the last usage of like a thief, he just throws in this parenthesis in the middle of a description of something else. Behold, I am coming like a thief. Blessed is the one who stays awake, keeping his garments on, that he may not go about naked and be seen exposed. So those who are figuratively surprised by this would be like people getting woken up with a fire alarm in bed and having to run out of the house naked, which is kind of embarrassing. As a matter of fact, it says in 1 John chapter 2, I think it is, that we may not be ashamed before him at his coming. I think it will be available to be ashamed before him at his coming. And we don't want that for us. That's why we want to watch, be awake, be looking for the signs that are so clear. And even though we won't know the day or hour, we'll be watching for it so we can finish faithful.